Pogo Flute the Clown. On a crisp winter's day, Anders, who is deaf, and his hearing twin sister Aurora were out walking around their small village of Oban. The twins were each enjoying a mixed bag of their favourite Glick sweets. They usually couldn't afford such a treat, but they had both been saving their pocket money for weeks. As they left the shop and opened their goodie bags to see what they each had inside, Anders started cheering, as he had found one of Glick's most famous sour cola-flavoured sweets, something they both enjoy. He popped the sweet into his mouth, and instantly his face went into some kind of shock. "It is so sour," Anders signed, spitting and cringing towards Aurora. She laughed at him and asked if that was the cola sweet, but Anders could not reply. It was so sour and was making his brain go funny. But Aurora already knew the answer. She quickly hunted through her own bag of sweets to find one, but she couldn't. She was disappointed and said, "I didn't get one." Anders was now back to normal and looked inside his own bag of sweets. "Look, I have another one. You have it," he signed. Aurora smiled. "Oh, thank you," she signed back. She took the sweet and carefully licked the end of it, which made her face twitch a little. Loving the feeling, she popped the whole thing in her mouth at once. And, like Anders, she made the strangest face. "Oh, it's so sour," Aurora said, almost drooling as the cola bottle attacked her taste buds. Anders just laughed at her. Skipping along the street as they usually did, they came across a big, brightly coloured poster titled Pogo Flute the Clown in Circus. "Oh, look! Pogo Flute the Clown is coming here to our village," signed Anders, pointing at the poster. Aurora never did like the look of clowns, especially the one on this poster. "That is one scary-looking clown. I don't like it," she said with a look of fear on her face. Anders put his hand on Aurora's shoulder to comfort her. "Clowns are sometimes scary, but look, you can see that underneath all the makeup and costume, it's just a woman. I bet it will be a good show." "Okay, I suppose you're right," said Aurora, looking at the poster again. Anders waves his hand near the poster to get her attention again, and then gestures to Aurora for them both to move on. But just as they set off, Aurora pulls Anders back and signs, "Wait, I can hear music." They both looked around from side to side, and at the same time spotted a large, brightly coloured carnival van at the other end of the street. On top of the van was an umbrella, and also some multi-coloured jumbo balloons. Floating out of the window at the side of the van, tied down from the inside and slowly being released into the air as the van was creeping down the road, soon to pass the twins. Aurora and Anders stood back to watch Pogo Flute's van get closer. It wasn't until they were directly in front of the van that they could see Pogo standing with one foot on the driver's seat and using the other foot to steer the wheel, all while hanging out of the top window, waving her hat and holding the umbrella. Excited people came out onto the streets to watch the clown doing her tricks, waving as she passed them. Aurora, now standing behind Anders, really doesn't like the look of this clown. Pogo Flute spotted Aurora hiding behind Anders and gave a wicked smile, and before Aurora knew it, a loud pop came from the van, and dangling before her was Pogo Flute, attached to a large spring which had sprung from the seat inside the car, offering Aurora an oversized rainbow lolly. Aurora jumps back with fright as this large clown's head flew directly at her. Pogo was now waiting for Aurora to take the lolly. Anders thought this was brilliant and laughs at Aurora until he realizes his sister is upset and decides to take the lolly from Pogo himself. Pogo instantly sprung back into the van as if the weight of the lolly was the only thing holding her down. She got back into position and continued to drive along the street, keeping her gaze fixed on Aurora. Anders turns to his sister and offered a cuddle. "It's only a clown," signed Anders. Aurora didn't feel the same. "She's scary. I have a bad feeling about this," she said. Anders tried to cheer her up by searching through his bag of sweets and pulling out another super sour cola bottle. He handed this to Aurora. She took it, and in an instant, the sourness of the sweet pushed away any scary thoughts she was having about the clown. Pulling the strangest face yet, she tried to say, "I think this is the sourest one I've ever had." Anders just laughed and signed, "Come on, let's go home." Nighttime came, and the twins were wrapped up in bed as the temperature outside grew colder. Aurora was fast asleep until a noise from a single instrument, which had been quietly playing outside in the distance, was slowly getting louder and louder until it woke her. She tiptoed out of bed and glanced out of the window to find a full moon glowing, and snow glistening as it settled lightly upon the ground. Then she noticed Pogo Flute the clown skipping down the street playing the flute. As she edged closer, Aurora could just make out that there were families in their pajamas following the clown, crunching along the freshly fallen snow in their slippers. They all looked cold and stiff, marching behind the clown. Aurora started to panic. She had been watching them for a few minutes now, and they were getting closer to her house as more and more families came out of their homes to join the queue behind Pogo. Aurora knew it wouldn't be long before Pogo and her flute would reach her house. Not sure what to do, Aurora quickly ran to her brother's bedroom, hoping he would know what to do. But just as she opened his bedroom door, the music, which had been slowly getting louder, was now the loudest it had ever been. Aurora knew the clown was now directly outside her home, but with that same thought, Aurora could no longer control her body or her mind. It was too late. She turned in the hall and was greeted by her mother, definitely still asleep in her dressing gown and slippers. The pair of them were forced down the stairs and out of the front door, joining the other families marching behind Pogo Flute the clown. The next morning was cold and snowy. Anders was woken by his vibrating alarm clock as normal. He yawned and stretched himself awake before getting up and getting ready for breakfast. He crossed the hall passing Aurora's room, noticing that she was not there. He continued downstairs, now noticing a cold draft in the hall. He turned the corner to find that the front door was open. He popped his head outside to check if anyone was in the front garden, but nobody was around. He closed the door and headed past the living room and into the kitchen. Still, he could not find anyone. Where is everyone? He thought to himself. Now feeling a little unsure, he carried on with his breakfast, feeling sure that someone would join him soon, but no one did. When he had finished his breakfast, Anders got back up and headed through the hallway, past the living room until he reached a cabinet. On top of this cabinet sat the little wooden box that kept his grandmother's magic gloves. He carefully opened the box, and the bright glow of magic shone from inside. He pulled out the gloves and carefully placed them on his hands, one at a time. The strange tingly feeling of magic made him giggle. He waved his hands around a little, when suddenly the gloves took control and started signing, "Warning! Warning! You must find your sister! Warning! Go find your sister!" The gloves stopped signing, and Anders pulled the gloves off and threw them to the floor, feeling completely shocked by what had just happened. Wow! That has never happened before. That weird feeling he felt before had just been confirmed. Something was not right. Believing his mother must be at work as usual, he said to himself, "I need to find Aurora." But where could she be? Anders carefully placed the magic gloves in his pocket, grabbed his boots and coat, and strolled out into the street. He marched further down the road, looking around and noticing that no one was around. No cars were passing by, and there were no buses carrying people off to work. Anders took a look at his watch, wondering if maybe he got up too early, but he hadn't. It was 9:20 a.m., meaning all the shops should definitely be open by now, and people should be out on the street getting on with their lives and chatting with their neighbours. He continued to trudge through the snow on the path as a strong cold wind blowed in his face. Anders was shivering and rubbing his arms trying to warm up, when suddenly, from nowhere, a poster flew towards him and was caught on his foot. He looked down and saw an image of Pogo Flute the clown and her circus show. Aha! He thought to himself loudly. Maybe that's why no one is around. Maybe one of her shows has already started and everyone has gone to see it. That means Aurora went without me. Why did she not wake me? How rude, he signed to himself. Not wanting to miss any more, he ran furiously towards the circus tent at the top of the hill. On the way, he noticed bright, colourful and flashing lights in the sky above. Once on top of the hill, and looking down into the open ground below, he could finally see the gigantic circus tent with lights moving around and flashing excitedly. It's already started. Why did nobody tell me they were going to the show this morning? He thought to himself, annoyed. However, the closer he came to the tent, the stranger things became. He realized he must have arrived at the wrong entrance gate, and that he must be at the back of the tent, because there was a large cage of people right in front of the cap leading into the tent. Maybe it's all part of the show, he thought to himself. He squinted to try and get a better look at the people in the cage, and slowly started to recognize his neighbors and others he remembers from around town. They were standing in the cage in their pajamas, lifeless. Anders suddenly saw a clown coming out of the tent and dropped to the ground, hoping he had not been seen. He watched closely as the clown opened the gate to the cage. The clown then took out her flute and placed it to her lips. Anders, now shocked and trying to understand what is happening, saw his sister walk out of the cage. She seemed different, quietly following the clown into the tent. He now realized why the magic gloves were warning him back at the house. His sister had been taken. When the coast was clear again, he got up slowly and ran quickly down the hill towards the cage, hoping that no one would see him. When Anders arrived, he saw his mother standing inside the cage. He waved at her, but she just continued staring ahead. It must be the flute that is controlling them, he thought. Right, I need to find my sister. All of a sudden, another small clown came out of the tent, which made Anders jump. Luckily, he was able to hide behind the cage just in time. This small clown was holding some sort of lead and pulling someone along behind him. This person was in their pajamas, doing acrobatics on a giant ball. Come on, get a move on. This is not what I'm paying you for, shouted the little clown as he pulled harder on the lead. This pull made the person on the rolling ball slip off and land on top of the small clown. Anders let out a laugh at the sight of this, but quickly covered his mouth with his hands, trying to stifle the sound. He stayed still and quiet, keeping a watch out for the little clown to see if he would get back up, but nothing happened. Anders very slowly inched towards the clown to check if the clown was in fact knocked out. He wasn't moving. Anders wondered if there were more clowns inside. I have an idea, he signed. He took the costume from the small knocked-out clown and tried to squeeze into it, but it was far too small to fit him properly. Oh well, it will do. Clowns always look stupid anyway, said Anders. Anders gathered his courage and entered the tent, and to his surprise there were more clowns, hundreds of clowns, sitting everywhere, shouting, laughing, crying, throwing pies and juggling balls. Anders scanned the arena and found an empty seat. He sits down only to be the target for a flying pie that hit him in the back of the head. The clowns roared with laughter. Anders tried to control his temper, wiping the cream pie from the back of his head. Pogo Flute entered the tent and walked to the center of the stage. Anders recognizes her straight away. That's the clown who drives the van. Pogo pulls out her clown horn and squeezed it hard 3 times. Anders watched as all the other clowns started to calm down and take a seat in silence. Pogo pointed up towards the roof of the tent with one of her fingers, and everyone raised their heads to see Aurora balancing on a giant hoop at a great height above them all. Pogo shouted to the audience of clowns, "Here is our next special bid. Let's start with £5. Anders glanced back up at his sister again to find her performing acrobatics mid-air on the hoop. At this frightening sight, Anders gulped loudly. The clowns were using people as acrobat slaves for the circus. The clowns let out a gigantic roar, cheering as other clowns were making their bids to buy Aurora. Making sure nobody could see him, Anders carefully pulled out his magic red gloves and put them on, and a plan started to form in his mind. Next to Aurora, Anders spotted a rope hanging from the top of the tent. That's it, I'll climb the rope and save my sister, he thought. However, Pogo Flute must have spotted Anders' red gloves glowing in the audience, because all of a sudden, Anders found himself surrounded by clowns trying to catch him. Luckily, he managed to slip away. Pogo was not happy and kept shouting instructions, but a lot of the clowns got confused and simply started juggling balls and throwing cream pies at each other. Anders was almost at the rope, still ducking from all the flying pies, dodging balls and darting away from the occasional clown trying to catch him. When he grabbed the rope, Pogo Flute suddenly appeared right in front of him from out of nowhere, making Anders jump out of his skin. She was playing on a flute of some sort. She stared directly at Anders with her angry eyes, blowing harder on her flute, trying to make it louder. Anders realized what she was trying to do, and he slowly and simply pointed to his ear and mouthed, "I'm deaf." Pogo's eyes popped out in surprise, and she became very angry. She blew into her flute with all her might. Anders, from out of the corner of his eye, saw Aurora spinning and doing her acrobatic moves even faster than before. He quickly realized that the clown's angry flute playing was affecting Aurora even more than earlier on. Anders panicked for his sister because she was so high and could easily fall from the hoop. Anders decided that enough was enough. He had to put a stop to all of this before it became too dangerous. With his magic gloves on, he waved at all the clowns in the arena for their attention. Soon enough, they were all looking at him. Even Pogo, who couldn't believe her eyes. As he began to sign, he cast a spell over all the clowns, commanding them to each transform into a jack-in-the-box. Suddenly, with a loud bang, all the clowns disappeared, leaving lots of different-sized wooded boxes all over the tent floor. Anders looked back at his sister to see that the curse was breaking. Aurora was waking up. She looked down and saw Anders far below her, panicking as she realized how high she was. In this panic, Aurora slipped, but was luckily able to catch herself on the hoop again. She was now dangling from the hoop with both hands, clinging on for dear life. Anders rushed up the rope as fast as he could to catch Aurora before she falls. Aurora struggled to keep her grip and started to slip some more, panicking at the thought of falling to the ground and hurting herself. Anders was almost there when he saw Aurora slip off completely. Aurora screamed with fear as she started to fall to the ground. Anders reached out his hand as far as he possibly could, hoping she would be able to catch it. Luckily, the magic gloves magically started pulling Aurora closer to the rope like a magnet. They clasped hands, and Anders guided Aurora onto his back, where she clung for life, probably squeezing Anders a little too hard, but she didn't care. Anders climbed back down the rope, and once on the ground, Aurora slid off his back and cuddled him with relief. Out of nowhere, they both felt a breeze whirling around them. They let go of each other and looked around to find the tent collapsing around them. Both twins ran for their lives towards the exit. Luckily, no one else was inside apart from all the boxes with the clowns in. As the tent came down fast and with a loud thud, both twins made it outside in time. They both fell to the ground just below the cage of people. Remembering they were all still locked inside, Anders hopped up and tried to help unlock the door. The people inside were already awake, but were very confused and freezing cold. With the door unlocked and opened, they all stumbled out of the cage. When Anders and Aurora's mother got out of the cage, she ran towards her children, hugging them both and shivering from the cold. The rest of the families gathered, and all ran for their warm homes, confused by what had happened to them. Finally, the three of them made it home. Anders carefully put the red gloves back in the wood box, while his mother and sister gathered at the fire trying to get warm. Anders hurried over to join them, taking out a small wooden box from his pocket and handing it to Aurora. "Here's a little gift for you," he signed. "Oh, thank you, what is it?" she replied with surprise, opening the box at the same time. Aurora immediately screamed and dropped the box on the floor. Looking back at her was a miniature Pogo Flute the clown, springing out of a box. Anders could not help but laugh at Aurora's reaction. Aurora, on the other hand, was not happy with another one of Anders' silly jokes. She started to chase him around the house, yelling, "I'm going to get you!"